across the fence, planning for the future by keeping an ear to the ground and an eye on the bottom line. We'll sit in on a course that's teaching farmers to manage nutrients and safeguard natural resources. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. When it comes to farming, the only constant is change. One of the changes that farmers can expect in 2017 has to do with RAPs, or required agricultural practices. Practices like cover cropping, nutrient management plans, and adding buffers to curb erosion are no longer recommendations, they're the law. UVM Extension has been at the leading edge of implementing these and other conservation practices on Vermont farms for decades. Our Keith Silva visited a dairy farm to find out from a dairy farmer what he's learned from UVM Extension.
A farmer's work is never done.
Working on the equipment right now, just putting stuff in the shed, make sure it's ready to go in the spring.
Curtis Lane operates Lane Farms, a 300-cow dairy in Bristol. He's the third generation to farm here. Something he's learned growing up in the dairy business is if you're going to make a change, make sure you've done your homework.
The previous generation always resists change, which is good, because if they didn't, you wouldn't make sure it worked before you did it. You'd be taking unnecessary risks. The advantage I have here with the two previous generations, if I'm not guaranteeing it's going to work, I better be quiet, because I will never hear the end of my failure.
Curtis raises crops on 500 of the farm's 900 acres. Almost all of the tillable acreage is considered highly erodible. So any new idea that Curtis brings to the table has to protect the farm's most precious resource, its soil.
We all knew we didn't want any of our nutrients to run off because we're paying for them or we're applying them. There's a cost associated with putting them in. If they run off, they do us no good, and if they're getting into the body of water, they're doing it no good. As it's going to take generations to clean up our lake, you know, it's no different than raising a child. It all starts at home. We're going to look at what we're doing here now and say, if I'm going to stay in business, I have to be on the edge of what's coming next.
Today, you cannot afford not to do this. This is what's going to protect you from those 2-inch rainstorms.
Starting each January, at multiple locations across the state, University of Vermont Extension offers a 5-week course on nutrient management planning to help farmers balance nutrients and meet state and federal reporting standards.
I learned a lot about my soils, the makeups of the soils, and such things. I knew, oh, this field needs this to grow this, but I didn't know exactly what I was putting into it of that, you know. And we were doing the best practice that we knew of at the time, and now I understand that best practice that we were doing previously was still logical, legit, and accepted. But now if somebody asks me, why are you putting that on that land? I can tell them that it has so many pounds of nitrogen or phosphorus, whatever, and the crop needs this in the soil to remove it.
So how do we actually go from this to this? Any ideas?
In addition to getting a crash course in soil science, participants develop a nutrient management plan, or NMP, that's tailored to their farm. Heather Darby is a UVM Extension agronomist.
Increasing the drainage of your soil. Taking the initiative to write, for a farmer to write their own nutrient management plan, is a huge time investment and also a huge responsibility. And so people that actually take this class, they're here on their own free will. Nobody's making them do this. If they wanted a nutrient management plan for their farm, they could hire somebody to develop that plan for them. They don't have to do it on their own. The farmers that are here are, interested in learning more about soils, about how to better grow their crops, what the crops need, how to reduce their impact on the environment. To really educate themselves is part one, and then to get this plan at the very end is a benefit of doing that. And farmers are really here because they want to learn how they're laid out.
I'm using it as a tool, as you would a wrench. If you plan on taking tires off, you got to have the right wrench. If I plan on farming, I got to have the right tools, and this is a tool that I have access to whenever I want it.
In order to input data and make up-to-the-minute adjustments to their plans, farmers use a computer software program called GoCrop. The software was developed by UVM Extension. There's also a mobile app so farmers can input information while they're in the field.
The nutrient management plan is a current what is happening today. It gives us all the information that we need to make an educated assumption of what we can do the following year based on the results we got in past years.
The plan's UVM extension helps farmers develop go beyond the farm. It's a tangible explanation of what a farmer is doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. For Darby, this kind of knowledge is just as important as having a nutrient management plan.
When farmers take the course and you ask them, why are you here? We know regulation is coming. We hear that a lot. We want to save money. We, want to improve our crops and the environment. So it has become more mainstream. More people know what it means, including the public. So it's also become a powerful sort of communication tool and gives farmers the ability to have something to show their neighbors and community. Yeah, saying like, look, I've gone through this really, intensive process to do my best by the environment and by my farm and by you, and here it is, and can communicate about it too, especially if they've learned firsthand what it all means. And I think people value that as well, because knowledge is power, and this gives them more knowledge and more power to really sort of communicate about the issues that we have in Vermont today. It's really important.
Back at Lane Farms, the clearest example that Curtis's plan is working is to look at the water coming off his fields. It's clear. The soil's not washing away, which means the nutrients are staying in place. Credit Curtis's nutrient management plan and the pride he takes as a steward of the land.
I use in discussions with people I know things I learned in my nutrient management plan about soil loss and the purpose of the cover crops, the purpose of the sprays, and the purpose of the tillage practices and so on and so forth, of what that directly does to the water quality that I have control of. Or I say control of, which is actually an incorrect word. I have responsibility for. Because if you do not own the water, you own the land around it, underneath the water. You have control of that. That has a direct impact on the water, which you don't own. Now that water that is moving through your land, you have a responsibility to the environment, to your livestock, to your family, and to the general public, that if we all take care of it, it will be there forever.
What's happening at Lane Farms is what's happening across Vermont. Farmers are making plans for today and putting them into practice for tomorrow. In Bristol, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
Joining me now is Kirsten Workman of UVM Extension. Kirsten is a member of the Champlain Valley Crops and Soils team in Middlebury. Great to see you again.
Great to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Now, you've been teaching these nutrient management classes since 2012. What changes have you noticed in attendees over the years?
There's more of them. We definitely have. We now, at least out of the Middlebury office, we've tripled the number of classes we hold, and they're getting fuller and fuller every year. And I know that's true up north as well and across the state. I think some of the demographics, I would say, the folks coming to class tend to be the younger generation on the farm. So if there's like Curtis that we just saw, the next generation, they start to take over some of the management. And they're definitely getting more diverse. So not just dairy farms, but we've seen vegetable farms and beef producers and goat producers. And also they're getting, I think, more computer savvy, which is making our job easier. So
yeah, what are you hearing from farmers about the new required agricultural practices?
I think, folks have been hearing about them and learning about them. Some folks know more than others and have been more engaged in the process. But overall, I think they're now a reality. And so they're just wondering now what they want to know is the details, the what, when, how, why, what's really required of them.
Do you think the farmers are ready to embrace the practices like cover cropping and no-tilling?
Well, there's always going to be a spectrum, right?
Right.
But I'm going to say yes. I think many farmers are already doing that. And you see in the piece we just saw with Curtis, folks like that are already there. So they've been proactive in doing the steps they need to get ready before that was ever really required. And so I think now that those roll out and it becomes truly a reality on all farms in Vermont as folks start to adopt these new practices and new rules that they're ready and they'll figure it out.
And it's almost like the proof is in the pudding. I mean, once we saw that farmer in the tape say, this works, look at how clean the water is. And so if he's doing that, it's an example for others.
Exactly. And still maintain his business and run it in a way that he feels is manageable and profitable and makes sense for them on their land. So.
How are the RAPs being incorporated into the curriculum for the nutrient management classes?
That's a really good question. And really, the classes have already been addressing all of those requirements because an NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, has a standard for what they call a 590 nutrient management plan. So our class has always been based on that, and that's really at the core of these new required ag practices. So the things like the bigger buffers and making sure your soil loss meets specifications, all of that was already built into our class. And so folks who have taken our class are already ready, and the new folks coming in, the class was already really designed along those requirements. So.
And as someone who's been working with farmers to make cover crops part of their practices, how do you feel about cover crops now being part of the law?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously having it be required will likely increase some adoption, but I think we've shown, I mean, cover cropping has increased just in the last 3 to 5 years exponentially from, just maybe a few thousand acres to in 2016, they're looking at over 25,000 acres for the state. So I think that folks are already starting to adopt it. I think the new rules will obviously encourage and require some people who hadn't adopted it already. But I think really in the end, the true adoption is going to happen regardless of those regulations. And as people start to understand the benefits of the practice, that's when we'll see continued adoption and long-term adoption, which is what's really important.
Can you talk a little bit about why it's important to do the cover cropping and maybe some of the hesitation at first, because for many years that wasn't happening?
Sure.
I mean, it's expensive.
Yeah, there's definitely a cost associated with it. And so what's really difficult to quantify then is how do you recover that cost? And does it increase your yields, or are there other benefits? And I think what folks who are adopting the practice are seeing is there is increased cost. There's definitely increased management implications of planting an entire another crop on the same field. But they're starting to see that sort of resilience in their systems. When we get those big rainstorms or we get dry weather, they're seeing their soil health improve. And while that's not necessarily quantifiable always and every year, they are seeing those benefits. And so they continue to implement the practice. And most farms I see, if they adopt it on a small scale, they tend to increase it over time. Although in some cases, they might decrease a little as they figure out the system. But, like any new practice, really, it's going to take each farm on each field really figuring out what works for them, and they're doing that now. So. Because
one of the challenges is that every farm is different.
Yeah,
field. Yeah, exactly. And so farmers have to know, not only the best management practices for some places particularly dry, but also maybe a traditionally wet spot too.
Exactly, and that's the new requirements are actually required in floodplains, and that's one of the more challenging areas to adopt a cover cropping practice. If you get water that backs up on a field and sits there all winter or freezes, that can be a really difficult place to grow a cover crop. So what I have seen though is as farmers see neighbors do it, they try it on their own farms, they're really learning and sharing that information with each other. And with us, an extension, helping us get that out to other people. And then we're seeing them, really build on that and increase their adoption of that practice. So.
So we'll see more and more of this as time goes by.
I hope so.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add just quickly if people want more information? Perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. You can always contact your local extension office. We can help with everything from nutrient management planning to looking at the economics. We have a new grant looking at what the economics are of cover cropping and reduced tillage on farms in Vermont. Also, if you're looking at information for the RAPs and how they might impact your farm, the Agency of Agriculture has a ton of information and on their website, and also all of us working in the kind of agronomy and water quality field are going to be able to point people in the right direction.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.